Hello, everybody. My name is Ksenia Bazdaric, and I will moderating this session, Fairness of Open Science, together with Professor Anna Marušić. She probably joined us online. And our first presenter and invited speaker is Thomas Klebel with the topic Article Processing Charges and the Stratification of Open Access Publishing. Thomas, the floor is all yours. You may start.
Thank you for the invitation and nice afternoon. I hope you're all as awake as I am at that late hour, and maybe I can take you along for, I think, a very important and interesting topic, which is article processing charges and open access publishing. We've discussed about that a little in the morning, and I'll give some further evidence and further details on that particular topic. But before I do that, I want to take the opportunity and reflect a little on the topic of our session, which is fairness in open science. You might question, why do we need to talk about fairness in open science? Isn't open science per se fair or aimed at making science fairer? I mean, if you look at open data, an important acronym in that sphere literally reads FAIR. It obviously stands for something else, but it still alludes to the fact that fairness and open science have something to do with each other. And I want to reframe that slightly and to some extent question whether open science really always and in all instances leads to more equity. And to do this, we have to start a little earlier and look at academia as a whole. And there it's rather obvious that academia is slightly or quite a bit unequal in several regards. There are structural inequalities in academia across regions and demographies and also subjects. So we have disparities in publishing between the global north and the global south, where research from the global north is more visible and often also deemed as more credible. Even within richer regions, we have this focus on excellence that leads to a certain type of cumulative advantage, then that leads to further funding to always the same institutions. We also have gender disparities where women receive less funding, they get to higher positions later and have few publications. And there's also, as mentioned, differences in terms of subjects where STEM subjects are better funded and often also deemed as as more credible compared to social sciences and humanities. And in that regard, open science aims at making things better, so to speak. And we've already discussed about the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which has very strong language with the hope that opening up research and publications would lead to increased learning between rich and poor, uniting humanity in this common quest for knowledge. But as it turns out, open practices alone don't necessarily lead to more equity and diversity. A very striking example for me in that regard is policymaking. You would assume that it's important for policymakers to have as much evidence as possible at their disposal to make good decisions, and therefore it sounds like a good idea to have open access. But it turns out that policymakers, many of them, don't actually read scientific articles. They rely on intermediaries, they rely on their networks to be informed about the most recent developments in particular fields. So opening up research doesn't change how they consume research at all. On top of that, there are obviously factors like region and gender and so on that continue to shape how people are able to participate in open science. And for this reason, we might go even one step further and ask whether open science might be at risk in some instances to reinforce existing privileges or to even create new ones. That has been the core aim of the ONMERIT project that I was project manager of and also deeply involved with a lot of the research we conducted. The project has recently concluded and had the aim of drawing out these different possibilities and threats to equity in open science, with the aim to overcome them with recommendations that lead to a distribution of rewards that is based on merit rather than on privilege. And the core output in our research was a scoping review where we in particular looked at these potential dynamics of cumulative advantage across a range of studies where we found very diverse threats. For example, some threats related to the cost of participation. Open infrastructures need training and need resources, and this might act as a barrier. Then we have the open access business model that involves APCs, might have another barrier there. The cumulative nature of data inequalities, if you have big data sets in-house, you're able to produce more publications from them and then potentially extend that data that you have. And for other people that don't have these resources, it's harder to do the same thing. But for the main part of my talk, I want to focus on the issue of APCs. And every one of you, I assume, will be aware with the change that we're seeing. The previous model being that libraries subscribe to publishers, and then the researchers have access to publications. And if you're not affiliated with a certain institution, or maybe your institution cannot afford some publications, then you're left out and you cannot read the literature. And open access is changing that, and we're not yet there, as we've discussed in the morning, but it's going quite a way already. The issue is that at least in some forms of open access publishing that involve APCs, there seems to be a new barrier that hinders people to publish where they would like to do. There is substantial research on that issue already. So a study investigating institutions in the US found that higher ranked institutions, the researchers from these institutions, publish more APC-based open access and pay higher average APCs. Another study for the US also found that publishing APC-based open access is associated with male gender, being from prestigious institutions, having received grant funding. So a lot of characteristics that seem to be connected with being better resourced. Also, a recent study comparing otherwise similar sets of journals found that open access journals having an APC lead to a lower geographic diversity among authors. In our research, we investigated the relationship between proxies of institutional resourcing and average levels of APCs at the global level, comparing scientific fields and countries, and also looking into changes over time. And to do that, we obviously needed some kind of data. For us, that were 1.5 million journal articles. The articles were all published in journals which are listed in the directory of open access journals. The time frame was 2009 to 2019, and the first and or last author had to be affiliated with the university listed in the line ranking. So there's already a selection here onto these roughly 1,200 institutions. The main data source for the bibliographic data was OpenAlex, that has been mentioned already this morning. And we then merged the data from OpenAlex with these further data sources. The main indicator we used was P-top 10% from the line ranking, and that's the number of a university's publications that belong to the top 10% most cited across comparable fields and years. And for us, this indicator is a proxy for capturing really resources of an institution that might help with a better resourced library, with more services in terms of educating researchers where to publish, how to publish, but also being able to fund them and fund APCs in particular. If we start to look at some of the data, here we see on the bottom the institutional ranking going from low ranking on the left to high ranking on the right, and the average APCs that authors from these institutions have to pay according to the journals they publish in. We see moderate association. We also looked at whether there's a difference between first and last authors, but there seems to be no difference in assigning publications there. But of course, the association that we see here in a bivariate manner might be explained by other factors such as the country or scientific fields, and I'll get to that in a minute. To look at the development over time, we separated the indicator for the ranking into 4 quartiles, and the topmost quartile here, the purple line, really shows that there is a gap between the most resourced and prestigious institutions in terms of the average APCs that the authors pay there, and all the other institutions. The difference between the lines, so the distances seem to be stable roughly over time. There is some ups and downs, but the general pattern stays the same. And we see a slight increase across last authors, but not too substantial. If we look at the country level, so we assign institutions to countries based on the data in OpenAlex, then we find a quite peculiar divide, I would argue, between countries that are below and above $30,000 GDP per capita. In the higher income countries here, authors from these institutions publish in journals with quite high APCs. And therefore, the average for these countries is consistently above $1,500. For countries from lower income countries, there is much higher variability. So we have countries from Latin America, Brazil is highlighted here, with very low average APCs that presumably is the result of a different publishing culture with Cielo and so forth, what we've also discussed to some extent. China is up there with the rest of the more higher income countries, which is also in line with what we find in other research where China is more similar to the higher income countries. But there is also high variability. We see relatively high APCs in some sub-Saharan African countries. To go one step further and to disentangle the effects of country and field, we built a multi-level model that controls for these at the same time, and also introduces and makes more explicit the fact that in the DOAJ we have gold open access journals and diamond open access journals, journals that don't have an APC. And so in our model, we model these two processes jointly. So one process looks at whether the journal has an APC or not, and the other process looks at the extent of the APC if one is there. And then we can see how the product of these two pans out. Here we see differences across fields, and it's a little small, but I'll run you through it. Overall, what is depicted here is the percentage change in APC if we increase the institutional ranking by 1%. So we find small to moderate effects that mean higher institutional ranking also coincides with higher APCs. The effect is strongest in the social sciences and partly also in the humanities. And we find a, so to speak, inverse effect in mathematics and physics that is mainly driven by these journals that don't have APCs. So in these fields, authors from higher ranked institutions publish more in journals that don't have an APC, and therefore the sum of the effects is actually negative. If we look at the effects on countries, we see so to speak, a mirror of the figure that we had before, where in higher income countries, there is actually a low effect of institutional ranking on the APCs. And this is somewhat similar to scientific fields and can be interpreted as a sort of threshold or ceiling effect, where if institutions are able to support APCs across the board in a certain country, then the institutional ranking doesn't make a big difference. But in other countries, like India here, the institutional ranking does make a difference in terms of the APCs that authors are able to afford in publishing. To sum up, we find that higher ranked and presumably better resourced institutions publish more APC-based open access and also pay higher APCs. And in our view, that's a severe issue, because open access publishing involving APC seems really to be creating a new barrier for who can publish where. And this has multiple implications. We have voices from societies and communities that are already less embedded in the global science, and these are further marginalized by these dynamics. And in particular, global issues like climate crisis need global perspectives. But if APC-based open access is precluding certain segments of academia from publishing, then this is exactly the opposite of what we need. These dynamics also might be amplifying existing inequities. The citation advantage of open access can be debated, but assuming that it's there, those that are able to publish open access in that way might gain further advantage down the line. Also, we have to think about future reward structures. More and more hiring committees and documents on tenure, although it's still low, are like increasingly having clauses for practicing open science. Obviously, we know that there are different ways to practicing open science, but this particular one is precluded for some people that are not able to afford publishing in that way, which might have repercussions for their future careers. There are many factors that contribute to the trends that we observe here. So there is a potential effect of institutional resources on research quality, which is quite simple to assume that if you have more resources, you're able to produce better research. And the research that we found also states that there is some connection between research quality or quality of journals and the APCs, and this might partly explain things. There's also an association between institutional resources and grant funding obviously often comes with policies to publish open access. There are agreements between publishers and universities, often in higher income countries, and I don't mean transformative or read and publish agreements here because they are about hybrid journals, but agreements that simply cover APCs for a range of journals, and not all institutions are able to afford that. And there's the issue of waivers and discounts. There's debate on how they work and where and when, but they certainly contribute as well. How can we improve? How can we make things better? Or how can we ensure that open science leads to an more equitable system? The first part, in my view, is to gather evidence, and that's what we did in our project. We've looked at many diverse sets. So we looked at academia and institutional reward structures and the things with APCs that I've talked about. We looked at industry and the role that open science plays there, also open access in patenting. And we looked at open science and the relationship it plays with policy making. And all of this research is available now as deliverables and is making slowly its way into journal publications. All of this has led into the creation of a set of recommendations that we've devised and that I want to briefly run you through. To come up with the recommendations, we targeted three stakeholder groups: funders, institutions, and researchers. And to create meaningful and properly validated recommendations, we gathered a panel of experts, 30 experts, drawn from the stakeholder groups, diverse set, gender balanced, and we engaged in a very iterative approach. We first started out with initial recommendations from our research, and then went through multiple rounds of feedback, and this greatly improved the recommendations that we came up with. They are available now and were created mainly by and with a focus on European actors, but with an awareness for the wider implications and global inequities that are present. We targeted also grander approaches that look into the research ecosystem as a whole, but there are recommendations for everyone and highly actionable ones that can be implemented right now. In devising these recommendations, we focused on 4 key areas that we found most pressing. The first was the resource intensity of open research that I already touched on, article processing charges that have societal inclusion in research and policy making, and also recommendations for a reform of reward and recognition, which is very important in shaping how researchers choose to act for the future. Just to run through a couple of the recommendations on open access publishing, they're all listed here. The most important one is probably to call for alternative publishing models that show potential to be more inclusive. That means consortial funding models, diamond open access, that come with no author-facing charges. To make that possible, we also call for a sustainable, shared and open source publishing infrastructure. That mirrors partly what we've also heard from Juan, and it's incidental because he was also part of our team in coming up with this. And this infrastructure is very important because it will help reduce costs for publishing, which is important to achieve the former, which is no author-facing charges. The most actionable one for all of us, which we've also discussed already in the morning, is so-called green open access, making sure that the accepted versions of our publications are available in open repositories. And to further aid in that, we also call for rights retention strategies that support the author's rights to self-archive publications. With that, I'll close, and I look forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you, Thomas. Our next presentation is about national initiatives for open science in Europe, a Horizon 2020 project. Our presenter is Alkos Lences from Hungary. Please.
Hello, everybody. This presentation will tell us about the promotion activity that was carried out by the Hungarian government institution for IT development as part of the NIFOS Europe project. This project is a Horizon 2020 project run by 22 institutions and 15 countries. It covers the South European and Central European countries, both EU state countries and associated countries. And as you can see on the slides, this project has 3 pillars, and we will talk about the third one, which is the promotion of EOSC, fair usage of data, and in a wider aspect, all open science related trends. As a KIFU institution, we just took different aspects for different target groups in this project, how to promote open science. We tried different aspects for PhD students, for researchers, for the wider public, and so on. And we will discuss these activities. The main platform for promoting open science was a newsfeed that was run by KIFU. This open science newsfeed started about last April as a test phase and started with a daily, weekly updates in last summer. Altogether, we had around 200 posts in the last year. That means a daily update where we try to promote all international and local trends regarding open science for the Hungarian community. If we just check these 200 posts and we focus on the most visited ones, we will see these 2 charts. The inner circle here, the blue ones are the posts that related to international trends like Science Europe and On Merit and others. So as you can see, about 75% of the posts just discussed international trends. However, when we just check the visitor numbers of the posts, we will see that more than half of the visits just ran to the local news and the local trends, which is quite surprising for us that our target group are more interested in the local news regarding open science and not the international trends we should discuss and follow in our own countries. If we just check the events that were promoted in this newsfeed, we will see a quite similar pattern here. It's really, if you check, it's like copy paste the two charts. The second one are the events promoted in this newsfeed, and again the inner chart, you see that almost more than 70% were international events, but the visited ones are almost only the Hungarian ones, which is again surprise, because in this COVID era we can easily visit any kind of events internationally, so we have really no problem with just traveling to Croatia or wherever we can follow all the events online or webinars, conferences. So we're just guessing about the reasons why the Hungarian community are more interested in the local news. It could be language barriers or many others, but it's still surprising just to learn about the usage of this news feed. We also had some interviews with Hungarian researchers regarding fair data management. The main idea was just to let them talk about freely about their concerns regarding research data management. So it was not a really conducted interview. We tried to invite researchers from all different areas, just to push that research data management is not solely for science and technology, but we also invited colleagues who are art historians, literary historians, sociologists and others, just to push that fair and research data management is for all and not only narrowed down for STM sector. We had about 40 views for the 7 videos which is published. This is, I dare say, it's not bad, but of course we could manage to promote them in a more wider area, just using other video platforms. We also had an EOSC champion program just to promote EOSC in the universities by professors of the university, just to reach out, not from outside the institution, but to let one professor just to invite his or her PhD students and colleagues, and just to talk about open science. It is clear that it's more easy to mobilize PhD students than professors, and we just asked them to ask their colleagues why they didn't attend. And it was clear that joining in open science even is really not rewarded at the institution. So why just use their precious time for this when it's really not rewarded in the institution? We also published an e-learning course that could be openly used by any Hungarian universities. It has 5 modules, just introducing EOSC and open science. This was for PhD students or even other students at the universities. We just tested it with more than 115 institutions in the country, and over 40 people who just were involved in the testing phase were just told us that, yeah, that this course was great. It's more than perfect, of course. Still, at the university, we have no course for open science. So how to use it at the university where we barely have course even for any kind of meta science issues. So we are unable to use it at the university at the moment. We have also events like Hungarian Open Science Forums. We have 4 events as part of the forum. As you can see the charts here, we just try to analyze the number of attendees broken down by professions. The blue ones are the librarians who just came from libraries and work as librarians and data stewards. And the orange ones are the researchers. And as you can see, the first, the second, and the fourth forums just attracted more librarians than researchers. It's clear. It seems like open science is taught as a business for librarians and not researchers. Even when we invited a director of a research institution, he just answered that I'm too busy for that, and even though I have hundreds of researchers at my institution, I will delegate a librarian because it's something we're going to go open science. It's good for the librarian, and researchers are not that interested. What about the third one, where we clearly see that more researchers attended than librarian? We are unsure about the reasons, but still, this is the only one. We had co-organizers, the main Hungarian research funds, and we are really unsure about the evidence, but still it seems that involving the research fund of the country will attract more researchers to join the event. We are still unsure about this, of course. Just about the discussions I was told, I would like to highly recommend to visit the poster at the back of the hall if you just skipped it at the poster session, because Licia and her colleagues poster just discussing all the activities carried as part of the LIFOS project. So if you're interested in national initiatives for open science in this region, just recommend to visit the poster. I'm sure Milicia will gladly guide you through the detailed poster there. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Akash, for your presentation. And now I invite Mariana Glavica from CESSDA and Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb, to present collaboration of social science data archives and scientific journals in the development and implementation of data sharing policies.
Thank you very much. So my name is Mariana Glavica. I come from Croatian Social Science Data Archive, which is a service provider of CESSDA. And I will be speaking on behalf of my colleagues and on behalf of myself, of course. My colleagues are Irena Kranjec, also from Croatian Social Science Data Archive, Janez Štebe and Sonja Bezjak from Slovenia, from Slovenian Social Science Data Archive. And I will try to show you some examples of our collaboration with journals. So a bit of introduction on who we actually are. So we are Social Science Data Archive. The meaning is in the name. So we are dealing with social science data. We have a long tradition, not so much in Croatia. In Croatia, we have a very young archive, but our Slovenian colleagues are there for more than 20 years, doing social science data archiving and research data management and all which is connected with dealing with data. And both ADP, which is short from archives, ADP is okay, whatever. So we are both national infrastructure service. So we are providing services on a national level, and we are doing this in an organization, in a larger organization, which is called CESSDA, which is Consortium of Social Science Data Archive. And this organization also have a long tradition. It was established as a membership organization in 1976, so more than 45 years ago. So this is to show you that research data management in social sciences has a long tradition. So I will be showing you some examples of our collaboration with journal editors. And I will be also showing you some services that Social Science Data Archive can offer, which are relevant to journal data sharing policies. We are, of course, operating in this open science context. This conference is all about open science. Transparency is very important keyword here, but we are focused more on data sharing part of this transparency, because as you might know, the transparency might be a broader context, might be a broader topic, which doesn't include only data, research data, but also transparent methodology and protocols, and so even software and things like that. You might have heard about transparency and openness promotion guidelines. You will hear about this more in our last presentation in this session, so please stay. Yeah, and we are focusing just on this data transparency part of the whole transparency concept. And we are also operating in well, Slovenia and Croatia, which are environments with underdeveloped data sharing culture. And we have also slow implementation of open data strategies by our national research policymakers, funders, etc. So what are the services that can be offered by social science data archives? Which are relevant, of course, to journal data sharing policies, but broader also. So we are trying to curate data in a way that they can be stored in the long term. We are doing quality control on this data. So we are checking if data are consistent. What is very important, we are also checking if this data is anonymized enough. We are also checking if documentation is complete, and we really think that this part is very important, especially when we come to social sciences, because many researchers are in social sciences are actually very reluctant to share their data, and they are using this loophole in most of the data sharing policies that exists now by major journals, and they say, well, we cannot share data because our data are very sensitive. We have sensitive information there. So we will not share our data. And what we want to tell them and educate them that there are mechanisms to share such kind of data. So support to researchers is very important part of what we do. We also provide all these standard infrastructure elements like the persistent identifiers. We can provide links to publications, standard licenses, etc. So here I will present you one Slovenian case of cooperation with their local independent journals in developing data sharing policies. I mentioned this transparency and openness promotion guidelines before. They are very well known, I hope, but there are also guidelines which are more specific to research data sharing, which are developed by Research Data Alliance. Probably most of you have already heard about Research Data Alliance. And they tried to implement these guidelines in Slovenian context. So they developed their own guidelines for implementation of scientific publishing policies on research data and citation in scientific publications. These were basically based on RDI guidelines. They partnered also with other research infrastructures in Slovenia, namely Elixir from medicine, Clarin for language issues, language data, and Daria for humanities. And they had several participating journals in this pilot program. So they were working together basically, and so these journals have developed their data sharing policies with support of ADP. after that initial establishment of RDA national node in Slovenia, this was just one of their activities. ADP continued cooperation with other journals, and until now they have 4 social science journals that have implemented research data policies. This continuing effort was done together with other social science data archive, which are cooperating under this SESDA consortium. We have this SESDA Journals Outreach Initiative, and we do dialogues with journals editors. We are discussing possibilities of support that can be provided by journals by data archives. We are also exploring capacities of data archives for supporting journals, because we have to tune in our services to better serve what journals are needed, because what we traditionally do is archiving huge data sets. That can be so from these data sets several research can be produced, and so the underlying data for research articles are a bit different. So yeah, we are trying to involve as many professionals as we can, so we are trying to collaborate with similar initiatives. For the end, let me tell you just a few words about what we have done in Croatia regarding implementation of research data policies with journals. So our most intense collaboration was with Croatian Sociological Review, Revija za sociologiju, and they introduced its first open science policy in 2021. They were also considering various epistemological assumptions in the humanities and social sciences. This is on the topic on how data sharing in social sciences can be hard. And as a next step, we will define instructions for authors, so to make this policy actually official. And also, we have organized one webinar recently with Udruga Znak, Croas. How do you tell it? So yeah, this is what we have done here. And for the end, I will just invite you on one of our next events, which will be on November 8th, and it's called Journal and Data Archive Collaboration Forum. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariana, for your presentation. Please sit down at the speakers row. I now invite Jane Polon from the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies, who will have a lecture, How the Society Publishers Practice Open Science Beyond Open Access Publishing.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jane Polon. I work at the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies, and I am presenting you a collaborative work with Elina Late. Elina has been leading several service studies on Finnish Learned Societies. Unfortunately, she cannot be here today with you in beautiful Zadar, but I will present our work. So, as the title shows, the talk is about how society publishers practice open science beyond open access publishing. Learned societies are often considered the bad guys in open access discussion. Many of us perhaps think firstly of Royal Society or American Chemical Society and other international big, rather wealthy societies that publish a large number of journals, who are not actually very actively promoting open access. But the situation is very different for the vast majority of societies around Europe that are actually very small scale publishers. So what are learned societies as publishers? Non-profit organizations, often run by volunteers, promoting and disseminating research in their discipline. Learned societies are also known by different names in different countries, frequently scholarly scientific societies or associations. And actually this conference is co-organized by one scholarly association, the Croatian Association for Scholarly Communication. Happy to be in this event organized by a society. So we have estimated that Europe may have more than 9,000 learned societies. The thing is that we know next to nothing about the organization and operation of learned societies. We know everything about research universities. We know everything about research funders. We have a lot of information on libraries, but we know next to nothing about learned societies. And this is a very important information gap. We should work harder on this topic. Well, there are some cases where we know more. And Finland is one case because we happen to have an umbrella organization for learned societies. That is the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies, where I work. And our society has almost 300 society members, including 4 science academies. And in Finland, the societies are the most important scholarly publishers. We heard this morning in Iva's talk that in Croatia, the journal landscape is very much dominated by institutions, while the book publishing landscape is very much dominated by small and medium-sized private publishers. But the situation is different in different countries. We know in Spain, for instance, humanities journals in local languages are published mainly by institutions, in Finland by societies, and in Norway we have a mix of institutions, societies, and commercial publishers. So that it is very important to always understand and very well the national landscape and its differences. So on the bottom of the slide, you can see we have conducted 3 recent studies on learned societies, surveys to Finnish societies. We studied their activities in the area of responsible research, and also we have recently conducted a membership survey to the individual members of societies. So mostly learned societies focus on organizing conferences and publishing journals. In this study, we focused on the survey on societies for in their activities in the area of responsible research. We had responses from over 100 societies. 97 of them are publishing societies, and in this study we focused on them and to what degree they uptake practices of open scientific knowledge. And we focus on scientific publications, open research data, and open educational resources. So, as regards the open publishing elements, we can see that the Finnish learned societies who are publishing, 70% of them already publish open access publications. Most of them have self-archiving policy, not necessarily registered in the Sherpa Romeo, but nevertheless, and many of them have also data policy for their journals. When it comes to adopting open data, it has to be remembered that many of the societies are not practicing research activities and they do not collect or produce research data, but those that do actually have a quite good open data practices. So here it seems that 40% of the publishing societies have open data. They also provide open research infrastructures, but relatively few of them train for opening data. And when it comes to adopting elements of open education, we can see that 70% of the publishing societies also provide educational events They provide open educational materials, 40% of them, but also the training for opening educational materials is still not very frequent activity. Here we can see that those societies that are publishing open access outputs already, they tend to also take up other open access activities and practices more frequently. So they seem to, once you start to incorporating open science and open access in your activities, then you also tend to act openly in other areas of your activities. So some conclusions. The most frequently uptaking element of open scientific knowledge is open scholarly publications. But the adopting of the practices seems to be cumulative. So open access publishers are more likely to take up other elements of open scholarly knowledge. And on the finally, I also indicate some interesting findings from our most recent survey study to the membership of the societies, that the individual members consider, in addition to the traditional forms of cooperation, such as networking, publishing, and organizing events, the promotion of responsible science to be important task of the learned societies. This includes openness of research-based knowledge, influencing science policy, defending researchers, and promoting research integrity and responsible assessment. Vast majority of more than 1,500 respondents agreed fully or partially with the statement that it is an important task of societies to promote openness of research-based knowledge or to publish research free of charge to the readers. So it is important and interesting to see how societies can respond to this demand from their membership. And here are some references to the work that we have been doing or we have used as basis of this work. Thank you.
Okay. I will now announce Alan Vodopijevec from Ruđer Bošković Institute, Zagreb, Croatia, who will speak about open science in an open cloud. And of course, his presentation is on the cloud.
So, good afternoon. Well, it's late, so there are two of us giving this short talk. It's me, Alan Vodopijevec from Ruđer Bošković Institute, and Dražen Koceljak from University Computing Center, University of Zagreb. Our institutions are partners in the National Initiatives for Open Science in Europe project. We will show you some goals and results of the project and its relation to EOSC. We are witnessing a growing number of tools, services, repositories, and infrastructures overall that are covering various elements of research lifecycle. So, for example, we have tools for visualizations, we have data repositories, publication repositories, computing centers for calculations, and so on. and they are not so visible and not used enough, because, for example, we had at the Ruža Bošković Institute one service for data visualization, and it was used just by our scientists and their fellow scientists that were aware that the service exists. So to overcome this issue, the idea is to create the web of fair data and services, and there we come to EOSC. EOSC is meant to be the environment, we can say the virtual research environment that provides access to research outputs and services, and it's such a web of fair data and services with seamless access to content, access to data from various sources, and access to services for storage, computation, using the same standards, so data and services can be combined, and so on and so on. And also, this network will provide training and support to improve the use of those services in the EOSC. You can see the showcase in the form of catalog of services at this marketplace.eoscportal.eu. It's basically the catalog of services that are included or onboarded to the EOSC. So, what is the role of National Initiative for Open Science Europe? This project is some kind of a proxy between locally developed services, local open science initiatives, local infrastructures, and of course, local policymakers on one side, and the EU perspective and EU on the other side. So is the proxy between local initiatives and the EOSC in general. There are two strands in the projects. One is to support the onboarding of services. It's about getting the online scientific services compliant with the EOSC requirements. And the second strand is the development of the policies, open science policies, and inclusion in the local laws. So NIFOS Europe also has the catalog of services and the local national open science initiatives. We can just say something about that. So one of the results is a Croatian Open Science Cloud initiative. So it's some kind of formalizing the open science initiative by creating a formal group of institutions that will help in promoting the open science.
Thanks. So Alan gave you a European perspective of the EOSC, and I'll briefly talk about the Croatian perspective and state of the Croatian National Open Science Cloud initiative. The project Alan mentioned, NIFOS Europe, motivated us to start the initiative. Very quickly, many institutions joined. We gathered all relevant stakeholder groups, including research performing organizations. All universities in Croatia joined, also all representatives of ERICS. Then Croatian Science Foundation joined, the ministry joined, and of course SRCE and the National University Library as service providers. We had these two goals, clear goals. So we wanted to influence the policy. We wanted to have the national plan for open science, and to suggest some changes in the law governing scientific activities and higher education. And the other goal was to set up a Croatian Open Science Cloud. So on this slide, I'm showing the results until now. We formed the two task forces. One task force was oriented towards policy stuff. So they wrote the proposition of the provisions that should have been integrated in new law. This part was not very successful, but because we saw the drafts of the new law and those parts were not integrated, but that's just one battle lost. And we're moving on. Currently, the National Action Plan for Open Science is being developed. As far as I know, 2/3 of this document are finished, and we are still waiting for 1/3. And in the future, from this task force, we expect templates for open science policy for institutions that could be adjusted, reused, and signed by institution in Croatia. As for the other goal of establishing Croatian Open Science Cloud, we wrote the rules of procedure for the Open Science Cloud. With this document, we defined the organizational structure of this future cloud, and also we defined in the document that we will have also a catalog of Croatian Open Science Cloud services, similar to IOSC. After that, we published also the criteria for inclusion of services in that catalog. This document consists of 14 criteria, and it's not our intention to use this criteria to tell some service providers your service is not good, but our intention is to have this checklist to talk with service providers, to tell them, okay, you have these points, but if you want a greater visibility and greater trust from researchers, you have to do this and this. And our role will be to help them to improve this part of services that are lacking some of the criteria. And the last thing, we are trying to establish the catalog of services of Croatian Open Science Cloud. We are relying in that job on the Croatian CRIS system that is currently being developed, current research information system, where will be a new functionality will be implemented. There will be possible to to add a service in the CRIS system, and after the evaluation, that service will be a part of Croatian Open Science Cloud. So I'll finish this presentation. If you have any questions, I will be available afterwards.
Speaker today, Inga Patarčić from Brook Center for Molecular Medicine, Berlin. Inga will present adoption of transparency and openness promotion top guidance across journals. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, everyone.
This was a very long day, so thank you for staying up until now. I live adoption. Yeah. I live in Germany, and Germans would say "Zucker kommt zuletzt," but I hope you don't speak German at the moment. I work as a research data manager at the Institute. I started this position a few months ago, and one of the first tasks I needed to do is the idea actually comes from, can I change the slides? Just a second. Not present. Okay, no. So the idea actually came from within of the scientific community, from data scientists. They wanted to know what are the founders and publishers' requirements for data management and data storage. Founders' requirements were not very hard to cover because there are a couple of big founders that we are having at the Institute, but publishers' requirements were harder because we have thousands of journals and I had no idea how to compare those journals. They were data scientists, so data scientists expect to get a matrix and that they can see the results. I started reading the policies of the journals and I was very happy to came across the top guidelines and that the journals are actually adopting, majority of them, the top guidelines. So they are defined by the Center for Open Science. There are 8 policies, they are modular, which means that the journal doesn't have to comply to all of them equally, but they can just implement some of them. And there are 3 tiers of stringency, meaning the first one is the less stringent and the third one is the most stringent. These are the top guidelines. So there are citation standards, data transparency, analytical models, so code transparency, research materials transparency, design analysis transparency, study pre-registration, and analysis plan pre-registration. If the policy is equal, if the journal doesn't implement the policy or only encourages some elements of it, then the guidelines are not implemented. But on the level 1, it depended on the policy, it will be some kind of requirement. So in the case of data transparency, there will be a requirement for availability statement. On the level 2, the data needs to be stored at the repository. And then at the data at the level 3, the data or the code or the whole analysis protocol needs to be reproduced by the reviewers. How does that look on the level of individual journal? This is an example of a Nature journal. So they adapt to all of the policies on the level 1 and 2. And then across one of the categories, so we have 3 levels. So journals like Cell or Cell reports, they require that the article states where the data is and provides the exact location, or some of them require that it needs to be stored in a certain repository. Okay, so I had the idea that I can use those categories, those top guidelines, in order to categorize the journals. But either I could do reviewing myself, so categorizing the policies of the journals myself, or I used more easier approach. And then I found out that there is on the internet that the Center for Open Science actually already provides the data. So there is a database of the journals and categories of the top guidelines. I use this information to provide this matrix for our scientists, basically presenting the journals that are the most relevant to them and how do they reflect in terms of the top guidelines. So if you look at the PNAS, you can see that it is a very politically correct, so it has the level number 1 across all the policies. But more dedicated journals like PLOS Computational Biology, they have very strong policy in terms of code transparency. So this is analysis from January 2022. And being an ex-researcher coming from the field of bioinformatics, I wanted to know more. So I did a certain additional analysis. I wanted to see across all these journals that were presented in this data table, what is the policy that is most often adopted. So what is the statistics? What do we have? On the x-axis, we have the number of journals, and this tells us that the greatest number of journals are actually implementing the data citation policy, and the smallest number of journals then is adopting to pre-registration either of the plans or of the study. Across all of them, usually they are adopting level number 1. So from the previous example, so I'll go one step back. Some of the journals I actually had to review myself because they weren't in the database. So I've learned that not all of the journals present there are in the database. So this is statistics based on 2,000 journals. And I expected that those that are present in this database that are evaluated actually implement the top guidelines, which was not the case. So 1/3 of the journals that is in the database, they do not comply to the top guidelines. I wanted to get more differentiated analysis. So I wanted to see across the discipline size of this scientific disciplines, how do journals in different disciplines comply to the top guidelines. So I used the Scopus database to get information about the journals and information about the disciplines that the journals report in. And I overlap those two information. So the top guidelines based on the name of the journals and the Scopus database or on the ISSN number. I got 90% of the overlap. So I reviewed now approximately 1,800 journals. And I found out that in Scopus, you have 4 categories. You have health, life, physical, and social science. But some of them can be reporting across different disciplines. So I defined the category of multidisciplinary, and then 2 categories if it reports about the social sciences or it doesn't report about the social science. This pie chart tells us that over 60% of the journals that are reported on their website comes from the social science aspect. Then I was analyzing as well the score of the journals across the disciplines. So this is the total score, the summary, the sum of all the scores of the top guideline, meaning that higher the score is, they have stringent top guidelines across different categories. So the score can go actually to 24. And this shows us that the majority, for example, the social sciences are more skewed to the lower scores. So the journals are skewed to the lower scores. However, some of them have very, very strict and high scores. Whereas in the health or life or multidisciplinary without the social, the journals that are in the database that are reviewed have the higher scores. I as well compared, so this is a similar representation, but across different disciplines. And it shows me that across these different disciplines, we still have the same trend. So that the journals usually have the policies for the data citation, then followed for the policies for the data transparency. What is interesting here is that the social science, this blue part here, they have policies, the stronger policies, more journals actually have policies for the pre-registration. Why is this important in the end? First of all, the idea came from within the community, and the feedback to the presentation, to the first part of the presentation, was very positive. And I think what they needed to understand, they have a feeling, oh, now the journals are requiring this and this, and the next year they will have a new requirements, and this next year they will have a newer requirements. So within this framework, they understood that these requirements are not unlimited. So they have a certain trend, and it's not like completely random, the requirements that are happening. On the side of the journals, we can see where we can improve. So either having more compliance to the top guidelines, not only by means of data citation, but improving the data transparency or more analysis plans or code transparency. Okay, and the patterns of these top guidelines, the compliance to the top guidelines, are generally kept across different disciplines. So I don't think there is so much bias in the database itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I please Thomas and Draženko and Alan, if you could sit over there. I open the discussion we have around 15 minutes for discussion. Are there any questions in the room? We will start with that. Okay, can somebody give the mic to Mario?
Yeah, I think I'll just shout. And like that as well, maybe a little bit more question, but what this is your publication going, what those will be published in okay.
So for another question, we're actually going to submit to this one works. We plan to submit to a journal that has its because it's a community journal that's interest. And we're happy to have support for that. But yeah, it's an issue. On promotions, we actually conduct a study and implement review intended documents. If I understood the question correctly, I'm sure. There is not much evidence yet that all next publications are actually being done and that deal with that. But I can see from discussions that are being had that this is slowly becoming more aware, getting more awareness that this is important. I assume that it will be the case in the future. Let's say soon. I've seen job offers that, let's say, in the Netherlands. But in our study on promotion guidelines, I think we actually found no mention.
My next one is, is the ABC cost ones, because you said the higher price ones are usually the higher tier ones. Are they still regarded more valuable than the subscription-based ones that are paid?
We didn't look at that particular difference. I think there's still discussion to be had there because some of the most position terms are hybrid positions, some that have even higher rates. But we didn't look at that. When we based our discussion on is finding that there is not a deterministic relationship, but still a 0.5 correlation between the assumed quality as measured by the income factor and the APCs of in that case, I think call one because it's only.
You can ask one question for the social societies. We said there's around 6,000 in here. Are they in the registry of organizations that are funders? Do you know if they have unique IDs that are
Probably not all. We estimate that there could be 9,000 in Europe. European-wide. Most of them are national or local societies. Of course, there are some portion of societies are international, and if some societies are in the reduced dimension, probably international. We that there. We will be looking at that because we have an interest in trying to map the landscape of the societies in Europe. That's a difficult task.
Okay, thank you. We have two Zoom questions. One is from Inga Patarčić. The question is, does any journal have the third level in all 8 categories?
And it depends on which category. On the plot, they were showing that there are, across all the guidelines, there are some journals that have third categories, but not, there is one, it doesn't exist a journal that have a third category for all guidelines, but there will
Do you remember any examples, the names?
There was actually the presentation, the negative psychology would be an example of the third category.
Great, thank you. And one for Thomas Klebel. Is there a way out from APC business model trap? It's not my question, it's from Zoom.
I think there are ways. So one obvious way that we already discussed today is simply going with reroute access and also in your management aspects. For the business model itself, I think the recommendations that I presented was to speak to that we need different models and for example, like say that the rate shows different models are possible. You need better infrastructure for them, but they're also that. So I hope that's the direction.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions in the room?
Thank you to all of the speakers for this presentation. It was a great pleasure listening to you. My question is for you, Jan. The remote societies, in your opinion, do they perform, like, if given the right resources, could they provide an alternative, a serious alternative to the publishing industry, you think?
Maybe nationally or international context?
Well, in the international context, first of all, ABC, for instance, is not a viable option for journals published in other languages that we use, or journals that are regionally focused. So, of course, in Finland, the landscape is already, when it comes to open access journals, open access almost entire. We have a couple of journals that are international, and they have ABC. A couple of these journals, they have international ones. Well, the good part of the societies is that we are hoping that research communities are taking an ownership of scholarly publishing and communities are involved. And of course, I very much like to see that research societies very much play that role. We can see some individual developments that are very, very nice. For instance, with the quantitative design studies that we saw an example of a journal that refined and by the society that started. ABC, the journal with very moderate ABC charge. But I think maybe one of the options is a stronger collaboration between libraries and science platforms. With societies to represent the commitment of the research community on and libraries and the other providers. Maybe I'm not sure if I will close to answer your question.
One more question or two questions. Vanessa, please.
Just one, please. To the Hungarian colleague, what that national catalogue of services for EOS, which is very, very valuable, is that being developed and populated in lots of other European countries, or as part of the EU project that you're involved in? So having a national catalogue of open science services, is that under development, or so not just in your country but in other countries?
Sure, if I understand correctly, there's no national regional catalogue.
Actually, we are neighbors, so we are.
So the idea, as I understand it, is to empower national initiatives to build those national catalogs, not as some yet another catalog, but as a building block of years. So this was also our idea. We have the services on the institutional level, national level, at the European level. So EOSP is giving visibility just to the upper one layer, and we want to give visibility also to our national services. And what we can do in the long run, as I mentioned, those criteria, we can help those services to onboard in our creation catalog. This means for all of them that wants to get to EOS, the next step is very easy. Maybe we could also automate, make it automatic, so they don't have to go and fill some forms in EOS, but they can transfer the data to EOS automatically.
Okay, one last question from Mario Melichki, I think, and then we will have some messages from our organizer. Please stay.
So it's one how do you to classify the top guidance to different communities? So it's about 50,000, so we know that we have around 50,000, even more than the ones that are how today and so we're talking about 70,000. What kind of community effort we needed that we can there raise top guidelines and should that mean more they can understand the everyday cost somewhere else?
So I didn't isolate it. You use the information from the database that is provided by the Center for Open Science. In January 2022, they had 1,200 journals, and at the end of August, there are 2,000 journals. So it is increasing 800 journals in 8 months. I had a personal conversation with them, and then asked them how to do the journals. The key for the list, because initially I thought it was they put it on the list the journals that are implementing top guidance, but then I realized it's not only key that they do that. There are 400, there are over 30% of them, or 50% do not. So there are a couple of ways they do that. The colleagues suggest the journals to enter. They covered like 5 impact factor journals from the major publishers at the beginning. So then they put the recommendation of the colleagues. And the third thing is that journals can actually contact them themselves and say, hey, we implemented the top guidelines, and can you please put us on that list? How will that progress in the future? I'm not sure. So when we cover all the journals, but I think already 800 journals in 8 months is a nice progress. It's not satisfying.
It's not bad, but it will take us a long time.
Okay, thank you to everybody. Special thanks to all our presenters and to the audience who lasted so long.